1. The open door. Anna had always been a light sleeper. Every creak, every groan of the old apartment building seemed to wake her. But lately, she'd been waking up to something far worse. Waking in the middle of the night, frozen, unable to move. She'd read about sleep paralysis, knew it was harmless, but knowing didn't make it less terrifying. At first, it was just the sensation of weight pressing down on her chest. Then the creaks started. One night, she woke to hear the floorboards groaning in the hallway. Her eyes darted toward the door. It was always shut when she went to bed. But now, through the thin sliver of space between the frame and the door, she could see darkness spilling in like smoke. A shadow passed by, too tall to be human. Anna tried to scream, to reach for the lamp, but her body remained frozen. The door creaked open an inch. Her heart thundered in her chest as she watched. Nothing came through, but she could feel something watching her. The next morning, she convinced herself it was her imagination. Sleep paralysis, hallucinations, her mind playing tricks. But then it happened again, and again. Every night, she woke to that same creak, the door opening wider each. One night, the door opened fully. Standing in the frame was a figure, impossibly tall, its head grazing the top of the doorway. Anna could barely make out its features. A thin, elongated face with eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. It didn't move, just stood there staring at her. She thought she must be dreaming, hallucinating. But then the figure stepped into the room. Its footsteps were slow, deliberate, each one sending a faint tremor through the floor. Anna's mind screamed for her to wake up, to move, but she was trapped in her body. The figure stopped at the edge of her bed, leaning down. It reached out a hand, long and skeletal, and pressed it to her chest. The pressure grew unbearable, like it was trying to crush her. She wanted to scream, to beg it to stop, but no sound came. Almost ready, it whispered, its voice like dry leaves scraping together. Anna woke with a gasp, tears streaming down her face. She looked toward the door. It was closed, but something was different this time. Her chest ached. When she pulled up her shirt, her skin was marked with a faint hand-shaped bruise. And the next night, she bolted the door before going to bed. She propped a chair against it, for good measure. But at 3:15 a.m., she woke to the same creak. Her body was frozen, her breath caught in her throat. The door was open again. And this time, whatever was standing in the doorway wasn't waiting anymore. 2. The other me. Jake had experienced sleep paralysis before. The crushing weight, the inability to move, the eerie sensation of being watched. But the episode he had last week was something entirely different. Waking in the middle of the night, his body frozen in place. He tried to wiggle his fingers, anything to break the spell, but his limbs wouldn't respond. A faint buzzing noise hummed in his ears, and then he noticed something. Someone was in the room. At first, it was just a shadow in the corner, a vague shape that didn't seem quite human. But as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, the shape began to take form, and Jake froze in terror. It was him. The figure was an exact replica of him, sitting hunched in the chair by the window. Its posture was wrong, too stiff, too sharp, and its head was tilted at an unnatural angle. The Jake sitting in the chair smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. His teeth were jagged and too wide, stretching unnervingly across his face. Finally, it said, in a voice that sounded like his butt wasn't, "You're awake." Jake wanted to scream, but his mouth wouldn't move. The other him stood up slowly, the chair creaking as it straightened. "I've been waiting for so long," it said, stepping closer. The thing's movements were jerky, like a puppet being yanked on strings. It leaned over him, its face inches away. Jake could see its skin wasn't quite right. It shimmered faintly like static on a broken TV. "I don't need this body anymore," it whispered, its grin widening. "You can have it." Jake's heart thundered in his chest as the doppelganger reached out, its cold fingers brushing against his forehead. Suddenly his vision blurred, and he felt his mind being pulled. No, shoved. Somewhere dark and cold. When he woke, he was alone. Everything seemed normal, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His reflection in the bathroom mirror seemed slower, lagging just a second behind his movements. It was that night the paralysis returned. But this time, Jake wasn't in his bed. He was in the chair by the window, watching himself sleep. The Jake in bed opened his eyes and smiled. his teeth jagged and sharp. 3. The voice in the vent. Mia hated the vent above her bed. It was old and rusty, but it made strange noises at night. Soft whispers that sounded like words she couldn't quite make out. Her parents said it was just the wind. Then came the night she woke up paralyzed. She couldn't move her arms, couldn't even turn her head, but she could hear it. Mia. The voice was soft, almost sing-song, coming from the vent above her. It sounded like a child. "Come play with us," the voice whispered. Mia's heart raced as her eyes darted toward the vent. A tiny face was peering down at her, its pale skin and hollow, black eyes barely visible in the darkness. More faces appeared behind it, dozens of them crammed into the vent, all staring at her. Open the vent, they chanted in unison. "Let us out." Mia passed out from fear. The next morning, she checked the vent. It was sealed shut, and her parents swore it hadn't been touched. But every night, the whispers grew louder, and now the faces were smiling. 4. The fingerprints on the window. Riley's apartment was on the 5th floor, far from the street below, yet every night she woke to see fresh fingerprints on her bedroom window. The glass was smooth and always kept shut, but every morning there would be a handprint smeared across the pane, as if someone had pressed their hand against it from the outside. At first she thought it was a strange coincidence or the result of condensation, but the prints came at the same time every night, just after her sleep paralysis episode. One evening, she decided to stay awake and wait. She wanted to prove to herself that it wasn't real, that her mind was simply playing tricks on her. When the paralysis hit, she couldn't move. Her body was trapped beneath an invisible weight, her breath shallow and labored. She turned her head slightly, eyes locked on the window, and then she saw them, the fingerprints forming in real time, as though someone was slowly pressing their hand against the glass from the outside. The fingers curled, leaving behind faint smudges. Riley's heart raced, but she couldn't scream. Suddenly, the handprints slid down the window, leaving behind a trail of slick, wet marks. The fingerprints began to push inward, and then through the glass, she saw them. 2 eyes glowing faintly, staring back at her. She couldn't move, couldn't look away. Her heart felt like it was about to burst from her chest. She wanted to scream, to run, but she was paralyzed. The figure outside began to smile, revealing rows of sharp teeth, its fingers now wrapping around the edge of the window. 5. The crawler. The first time Lily experienced sleep paralysis, she woke to the sound of skittering. It was an unsettling, frantic noise, like tiny claws scrambling across the floor. Her eyes locked onto the dark corner of her bedroom, where someone, a figure with long, thin limbs, bent at odd angles, crawled across the floor toward her. Its body was almost too thin, like it was made of bones and stretched skin, with sharp joints that cracked and popped as it moved. The creature's head tilted at an impossible angle, its black eyes staring at her. Lily tried to scream, but her voice was caught in her throat. She could feel its breath, hot and feet as it crawled closer, its skeletal hands scraping the floor, and then it stopped right next to her bed. The crawler tilted its head, examining her with unsettling curiosity. Lily could feel the coldness of its presence and its breath on her skin, even though it hadn't moved an inch. It whispered in a voice like broken glass, "I've been waiting for you." Just before it could reach out and touch her, the paralysis broke, and Lily bolted upright, gasping for air. Her room was empty. The next morning, she found a thin scratch across her wrist, as though something had touched her in the night. The crawler was still waiting, just out of sight. 6. The lurking shadow. Every time Alex had a sleep paralysis episode, the same thing happened. He'd wake up, unable to move, unable to breathe, and there, always in the corner of his room, was this shadow. It wasn't a regular shadow. It was alive, twisting and writhing like it was made of smoke and darkness. It moved slowly, creeping toward him, every night inching closer. It was the first time it reached him. It felt like a cold gust of wind swept through his body. He felt empty, like something had been drained out of him. The shadow didn't speak, but Alex could hear its whispers in his mind. Night after night, it came closer. He couldn't explain it, but the shadow felt like it was feeding on his fear, growing stronger each time. Alex started to dread sleeping, but the paralysis came every night like clockwork. One night, As the shadow crept to the edge of his bed, Alex finally managed to open his mouth. He gasped for air and whispered. The shadow paused, its whispers dying down to a low hum. It stopped moving altogether. Then, in a voice that wasn't his own, it whispered, "I already have 7. The ticking. Lena's sleep paralysis always came with the ticking. At first, she didn't notice it, but after a few weeks of episodes, it became impossible to ignore. The sound started faintly, like a clock in the distance, and then grew louder as the paralysis set in. It sounded like the ticking was coming from inside her own head. Each night, it got worse, louder, more insistent. The sound was so overwhelming that it drowned out all other thoughts. It was like the ticking was taking over her mind. One night, when the paralysis hit, the ticking was deafening. She couldn't breathe. The sound filled her skull, and she felt like her brain was vibrating with it. The clock wasn't just ticking, it was counting down. And then she saw it. From the corner of the room, a tall, gaunt figure stepped forward, its face obscured by shadows. It raised its hand, and the ticking grew louder, almost unbearable. The figure whispered in a low, mechanical voice, "Time's up." Lena felt something snap inside her, and then everything went black. When she woke, she wasn't in her bed anymore. The ticking was still there, echoing in her ears, and the figure stood over her. Its face was now clear, cold, metallic, with clockwork gears spinning in place of eyes. "Your time's up, Lena," it said, its voice like 1,000 gears grinding together. 8. The doorway. Since she moved into her new apartment, Lucy had experienced the same sleep paralysis. Every time it happened, she woke up staring at the doorway. The first time it was just an empty doorway, but the second time she saw something standing in a doorway, barely visible in the shadows. It was tall, thin, with its back to her. She could hear it breathing. The third time, it was clearer. The figure was facing her, its face a blur of shifting shapes, like it couldn't decide what it wanted to look like. Its eyes were black pits, and its mouth was stretched wide in a grin. Every night, it moved closer. But Lucy couldn't scream. She couldn't move. On the 7th night, the figure stepped into the room. It moved slowly, like it was savoring her fear. It reached toward her, its fingers elongated and cold, and whispered in a voice that made her skin crawl. "I'm not leaving." The night, the reflection, Ben never liked looking at mirrors, but it was something he couldn't avoid. Every night when he went to bed, the full-length mirror on his closet door reflected his room in a way that felt unnatural. One night, he woke during a sleep paralysis episode. His eyes were locked onto the mirror, where his reflection wasn't quite right. He saw himself lying in bed, but the reflection was moving on its own. The reflection sat up a slow, jerky motion and smiled. Ben couldn't breathe. His own reflection in the mirror stared at him, its eyes dark and hollow. The smile it wore twisted unnaturally, too wide, too sharp. The reflection lifted one hand and placed it against the glass, its fingers leaving wet streaks of something black and oily. Ben could feel the coldness of the mirror seeping into his skin, and the reflection began to move closer, pressing its face against the glass. "Let me out," it whispered. Ben tried to scream, but the paralysis kept him still. The reflection reached out, its fingers now slipping through the glass, stretching unnaturally long. He could feel them grazing his skin. Something was coming out of the mirror. 10. The laughing. Sophie had always been afraid of clowns. She thought she had outgrown it, but one night, her worst fear came to life during an episode of sleep paralysis. Sophie woke, unable to move, and she heard it. The sound of laughter, high-pitched and maniacal, echoing in her ears. It was coming from the corner of the room. Her heart pounded in her chest. She tried to open her mouth, but no sound came. There in the corner stood a clown. Its face painted in bright colors, its smile too wide and unnatural. It was wearing a tattered, old circus costume that looked like it had been rotting for years. The clown's eyes were large, black, and empty, filled with something otherworldly. The laughter grew louder. The clown's body twisted unnaturally, like it was made of rubber, and it began to crawl across the floor toward her. Its hands were large and gloved, but the fingers were twisted and sharp, scraping against the wooden floor. "No, please." Sophie tried to beg, but the words wouldn't come. The clown's laugh only grew louder. It was standing next to her now, its cold, painted face inches from hers. It leaned in and whispered in a raspy voice, "I've been waiting for you." 11. The breathing. Every night, just before she fell asleep, Lisa would hear it. The soft, rhythmic sound of breathing. It wasn't her own. It was coming from somewhere else in the room. One night, Lisa woke during a sleep paralysis episode. The breathing was louder now, close, almost on top of her. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, but the air felt thick, suffocating. She tried to glance around, but she could see nothing. The breathing continued, slow and steady. Suddenly she felt it, a cold breath against the side of her face. It was close, too close. She turned her head slowly, and there it was. A figure crouched beside her bed, its face inches from hers, its mouth open, breathing heavily. Its eyes were wide and empty, like black holes that pulled in the light. It didn't speak, but the sound of its breath was deafening. Lisa could feel its hot breath on her skin, but she couldn't move, couldn't escape. As the paralysis began to fade, she could still feel the air thick with the figure's presence. She glanced around her room. The breathing stopped, but the feeling didn't go away. 12. The scratching. Tom had always heard strange scratching noises when he woke up in the middle of the night, but he thought they were just the old pipes or the house settling. That was until one night during sleep paralysis, when the scratching was louder than ever. He lay there, frozen, as he heard it coming from beneath his bed. The sound was frantic, desperate, as though something, or someone, was clawing its way out. The scratching grew louder, closer, until it stopped. Then, a long, low growl came from under the bed. Tom could feel his body trembling, but he couldn't move, couldn't scream. Then, a hand shot out from under the bed, gripping the side of the mattress. It was pale, bony, with long, twisted fingers. Slowly, the creature began to crawl out, its face hidden in shadows. But the smell, oh God, the smell, was enough to make Tom's stomach churn. It wasn't human. "I've been waiting for you." 13. The nurse. Megan had always hated hospitals, but it wasn't until one night, during an episode of sleep paralysis, that she realized just how much she feared them. She woke up unable to move, her body as heavy as stone, and the first thing she saw was a woman in a white nurse's uniform standing at the foot of her bed. She didn't recognize her. Her face was obscured by a surgical mask, but Megan could see her eyes, cold, lifeless, and completely still. The nurse stepped forward slowly, her movements unnaturally smooth. Megan couldn't scream. "Don't worry," the nurse said, her voice soft and sweet, though it sent a chill through Megan's spine. "This won't hurt a bit." The nurse lifted her hand and placed it over Megan's chest, her fingers cold and stiff. Megan could feel something inside her, shift. The nurse's hands were shaking now, pressing harder into her chest, pushing down until Megan gasped for it. "I'm just helping you relax," the nurse cooed, her fingers digging into her chest. "You're going to be just fine." 14. Olivia's sleep paralysis had been getting worse. Every night, the same figure appeared in her room, a tall, thin figure with hollow eyes. But one night during her episode, she realized something truly terrifying. The figure was her. She saw herself, standing in the corner of the room, staring at her with a twisted smile. The figure moved forward, its movements jerky, inhuman. She couldn't move, couldn't scream as the twin of herself stood at the edge of her bed, slowly, deliberately. It reached out a hand, placing it on her face. Its touch was ice cold, and for a brief moment, Olivia felt herself slipping away. Then the twin leaned in close and whispered, "I was always here." 15. The roommate. Mark had been living alone for months, so he was confused when he woke up in the middle of the night to find a figure sitting on the edge of his bed. The figure was a woman, sitting motionless, her face obscured by her long hair. Mark could barely make out her shape, but what terrified him most was that she seemed to be waiting. "I'm not real," she whispered. "I'm just a memory." Mark's heart pounded. He knew it wasn't a hallucination. There was someone sitting on his bed. Her breath was cold against his neck, and she was close enough that he could feel the chill of her skin. "We're never left," she said, her voice cracking. "I've been here the whole time." 16. The eyes in the walls. Katie had always lived in the same house, but lately, something felt off. Every night, when she experienced sleep paralysis, She could hear faint scratching coming from the walls. At first, she chalked it up to mice or the house settling, but that night was different. The scratching grew louder, then stopped abruptly. Katie's heart raced as she tried to move, but her body was frozen. She could feel the air in the room grow colder, and then she saw it. Two large, dark eyes staring at her from the walls. The eyes blinked slowly, and then a face began to form, emerging from the cracks. It was disfigured, with skin stretched too tight, and its mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. The figure started to slither out from the walls, its limbs unnatural, along. Katie could do nothing but stare as the creature crept closer. The eyes never left her. Its breath was rancid, like rot, and with every exhale, the figure grew larger. "I've been watching," it whispered, the voice distorted, low and guttural. Just as the figure reached the edge of her bed, the paralysis broke, and Katie bolted upright, gasping for air. The eyes were gone, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were still watching her from inside the walls. 17. The tall man. David had always been able to move past his sleep paralysis episodes, until one night he woke up to see the tall man standing at the foot of his bed. The figure was enormous, its head brushing against the ceiling, and its limbs were long and contorted. David's eyes locked with the tall man's as it stood still, watching him. He couldn't move, couldn't scream. The tall man's skin was pale, like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. The thing had no facial features, just an empty void where its face should have been. Its shadow stretched across the entire room, covering the walls, the floor, everything. It moved closer, its limbs cracking with each step. David could feel the cold air around it, the oppressive weight of its presence pressing down on him. "You should never have looked at me," the tall man whispered, its voice hollow and distant. Before David could react, the paralysis ended, and the figure was gone. But the cold lingered, and for weeks, David couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed by the shadow of the tall man. Every reflection, every corner of his room, seemed to hold a dark presence waiting to return. 18. The sleepwalking. Erica had always been a deep sleeper, but she never thought she'd experience sleep paralysis until that night. She woke to see herself standing in front of her bedroom window, staring out into the pitch-black night. Her body was frozen, but her mind was alert, and she could feel her own eyes watching her from the bed. She was trapped inside herself. Her reflection in the window wasn't hers anymore. It was her body, but something was wrong. The reflection smiled, but Erica didn't feel like it was her smiling. The figure in the window moved slowly, unnaturally. The sleepwalking version of Erica turned, its eyes locked on hers. Its grin was too wide, its teeth jagged and sharp. "You should be sleeping," it whispered from across the room, even though it hadn't moved its mouth. The voice was a hollow echo of her own. Suddenly, her body reached out and touched the glass. Her hand pressed against the cold window, its reflection moving faster than she could react. The figure was mimicking her movements, but with an eerie delay, like it was a step ahead. In an instant, the paralysis lifted, and Erica bolted upright in her bed. Her heart pounded as she glanced around the room. The reflection in the window was gone, but she could still feel the coldness of her own presence, standing behind her watching. 19. The visitor. Tom's sleep paralysis was becoming more frequent, but that night was different. He woke to the familiar sensation of being frozen in place, but this time there was someone standing at the foot of his bed. The visitor was tall, almost impossibly so, its face hidden beneath the hood. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there watching him. Tom could feel the weight of its gaze, like it was looking into his very soul. The air grew colder, and the visitor's shadow seemed to stretch across the entire room. Tom tried to scream, but his throat was dry. His eyes darted to the clock. It was 3 a.m., the exact same time every night. The visitor took one step forward, its feet dragging along the floor with an eerie scrape. Tom could hear its breathing, slow and deliberate. Then, it raised a hand, pointing directly at. "You are mine now," the voice whispered from deep within the hood. It was muffled, but somehow still clear enough to send chills through Tom's spine. Suddenly, the paralysis broke. Tom shot upright, gasping for breath. But when he turned to look, the visitor was gone. The room felt empty, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting for him in the shadows. 20. The whispers. Jessica had always been a heavy sleeper, but lately, her sleep paralysis episodes had been growing worse. Every time it happened, the same thing would occur. Soft whispers, barely audible at first, would fill the air. The first time she heard them, she assumed it was just the wind or her mind playing tricks. But the whispers were persistent, growing louder each night. Tonight, she woke to hear them again. This time, they were close, too close. The whispers surrounded her, but there was no one in the room. They seemed to come from the walls themselves, growing louder and more frantic. "Don't listen," one whispered. "Stay quiet. We're coming for you." Another hissed. Jessica could feel her body trembling, but she couldn't move. She could hear the whispers growing darker, more menacing. And then, just as suddenly, everything went silent. But the silence didn't last. Something began to scrape along the walls. Something large, something fast. The whispers returned, now louder than ever. "You can't hide," they taunted. "You can't escape." The paralysis finally broke, and Jessica shot up from her bed, gasping for air. But the whispers didn't stop. They continued to echo in her mind, even when she was wide awake. They were still with her, lurking just beneath the surface. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and any creepy experiences you've had. If you have a story of your own that you'd like to share, leave it in the comments, and we might feature it in one of our future videos. Don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales, and stay tuned for the next one. Thanks for being a part of our creepy community.